Hi, my name's Jamie, and today I'm going to take you on a tour of an Eastern Algonquian Yehakin. So follow me as we step inside our Yehakin. But as I step inside, you'll notice that the doorway of the Yehakin is very low. It's not because people were shorter back then, that's kind of a common myth. It's actually because there's going to be a fire in there, and we don't want the smoke to try to rush out of the door. We want it to go out of the smoke flap at the top of the house. So now we are inside of the Yehakin. Yehakin is the Eastern Algonquian word for house or home. And typically who is going to live inside of a Yehakin is a single family. So it's usually going to be a mother, a father, and however many children they might have. And the interesting thing about this type of a home is that it is owned by women, because Powhatan society, or the Eastern Algonquian society, is actually matrilineal, which means that your family status and affiliation will pass down through the women's line, and the women also own everything as well. So typically how these Yehakins are constructed is you are going to take saplings, usually in the springtime, cut them down, and while they're still bendable and they haven't cured yet, you're going to burn the ends of them, drive those saplings into the ground in the size of Yehakin you want to build, and then latch them together. So they're going to be latched together with rope that's usually made by taking plant fibers and stripping them and twisting them together with a double twist. So you're going to take that rope and take those saplings, those nice young green saplings, tie them together in basically a dome shape, and that's going to be the basic structure, kind of the frame of your house. The outside covering is going to be made out of mats that are made from local river reeds. So we think probably the most common type of reed they're using are cattail reeds or bulrushes, and those are going to be taken and either sewn or woven together. You use needles, and again you'll use some of that thread that you get from plant fibers and sew them into tight mats, and then those are going to be sewn onto that framework. So those are the walls of your house. So the frame of your house is saplings. The walls of the house is going to be made out of mats that are made out of reeds. And the size house is just going to be determined by the size of your family. So if you have a larger family, you might build a bigger home, or in some cases, if you're wealthier, you might also build a bigger home. So just like today, richer people might build a bigger house because they're richer and they have more stuff to store in it. Your average family, which isn't necessarily considered wealthy or important in this society, may just have an average home that's based on the size of their family. So now I'm going to take you through some of the components that make up the Yehakin. Even though it's one single room, there's a lot of different features in here that tell you who might live inside the Yehakin. So just like our homes today, by looking at the things that are inside the home, you can usually tell who lives in the house. So you can tell what kind of people live in the house, what their jobs are, what kind of hobbies they're into. And by looking around a Yehakin, you can tell the same things from the things that are stored inside of it. So I mentioned that a Yehakin is usually filled with a mom and dad and however many children they have. So the man's job in Powhatan or Eastern Algonquian society is to be a hunter and a fisher. And we're coming up right now on the spring season, which is fishing season. So we have some equipment in here that shows that a hunter and a fisher live in this house. So attached to the wall behind me are a lot of different types of fish nets. And these fish nets can be used as cast nets. They can also be set up like weirs in the water to dry fish into certain areas. They're made out of the same kind of plant fibers that the house is tied together with. And we've got different sizes. They might be for different size fish depending on what you're using. But they were using a lot of different kinds of fishing equipment. We've also got a fishing spear attached to the wall here that a man could easily take down, and if he's going fishing just by himself or just, doesn't want to bring in a big haul like you would with a net, he could use that spear and go down, maybe do something like light a fire to attract fish to the surface of the water, and then use the spear to spear them as they come up. I also, on the ceiling, you see, kind of hung up high is a fish trap. So I mentioned sometimes those nets are set up like walls, basically a weir to drive fish into a certain area. So they might funnel them into something like a fish trap, something where they would go in and not be able to get back out, and then you could pull the fish up. So this house would also have hunting equipment. It would have a bow and arrows in it for when the men go out to hunt. It may even have warfare equipment, so you may see things like war clubs, tomahawks. Again, the bow would be used for warfare as well. So those are the types of clues that would be in here that tell you that a man is living in the house. So in addition to the items that are stored in a Yehakin that would show men's activities, and then a man or a provider in a family would be living in a house, there's a lot of items in here that would also indicate that there's a woman in the house. So I mentioned that women own the house, and they own all the stuff in it, in a way. They make a lot of it, they own it, it's matrilineal. So you're going to see a lot of clues about a woman living in this house. One of those is that you see right here, I've got a row of baskets hanging next to me. That row of baskets is going to indicate that there's a lot of food being stored in the house. Women are bringing in the other half of the food, so men are hunting and fishing, and women are gathering and farming. So they're going to be producing over half of the food by doing agriculture and by gathering wild foods as well. And as they're processing that food, it's going to need to be stored somewhere. So just like we store our food in our house today, in a Yehakin, that food is going to be put into baskets. It's going to be dried out first, put into a basket. It's going to be hung up high. So you're always going to see it up high in a house because there is going to be smoke in this house almost all the time. There's always going to be a nice smoke layer because that keeps everything in here dry. Here in Virginia, we have very humid weather, so if you don't keep things dry, it gets moldy. So all these baskets hang up high so that the food is in the smoke, it's keeping it dry, and it's keeping it from getting moldy. It also helps to keep the bugs out of the food so the critters don't get in there and eat your food as well. Some of the other indicators that a woman lives here are things like cooking equipment. So I've got a nice clay pot here indicating that a woman would be cooking. She would not be cooking inside of her house. The house is kind of close quarters. It's kind of dark in here, so sometimes it's hard to do the cooking in here. There's going to be a separate fire area outside where she's going to carry her cooking equipment outside and do the cooking out there. And there's all other food processing elements in the house, like a corn grinder, for processing that food. So after you dry it and store it, you're going to need to process it, you're going to need to cook it. And women would be taking care of a lot of that as well. So you're going to see a lot of indications of that in the house here. There's also a lot of furs in the house because the Powhatan, both men and women and children, would be wearing furs as clothing. So that even though they were doing a lot of weaving and they were making a lot of rope out of the plant fibers, there's not a really good plant fiber here for cloth. So you'll notice a lot of pelts and furs in the houses because they use that as fabric. So the clothing that they're wearing is made out of deer skin typically. The other animals that are native to Virginia were just as used for clothing as well. So their shoes, their bedding, their bags that they wear sometimes, headbands, all kinds of different stuff, even just bags to carry things around when we're with furs. So you would have a lot of just furs either waiting to be made into things for the family or already made into things for them to use in their daily activities. So I mentioned that the kitchen was outside of the Yehakin, so technically not all the rooms are located within the walls of the Yehakin. The cooking is done outside, and that's mostly because the inside, like I mentioned, is very dark. It's closed, it's hard to move around. And as you can see, when you cook outside, you have a lot more room to move around. It's bright out, you can get a bigger fire going. So the one room of your house that you're not going to have inside is typically the kitchen. So some of the indicators in the house that a child would live here is going to be a little bit harder to spot sometimes because what children are playing with is usually small versions of what adults are using. So they're going to have toys that are made to look like things they're going to use as adults. So sometimes they're made just a little bit smaller. But a very clear indicator that a baby might live here is what's hanging on the wall beside me. This is called a cradleboard. And a cradleboard is something that a mom might use to carry her child in. Very similar to the types of backpacks women use today to carry their children in. So a child is going to be kind of strapped to this, swaddled very tightly, probably in some sort of leather. You see we've got a nice fur coating the inside here to keep the baby nice and cushioned, and usually tied very gently and that's swaddled to this cradleboard. It's got this piece, this kind of head piece at the top to keep it from bumping against anything as you're holding the baby in it. And that way when mom is out gathering or mom is out doing agriculture, she can take the baby with her, prop her or him up against a tree and let them watch and learn as the adults are working in the fields. Keeps baby safe, and it's a pretty common feature you would see in a Yehakin. So something every house needs, obviously, is a place to sleep. So I'm sitting up on a raised platform. It's going to be made with those same kind of saplings you're using as the framework for your house. You're just going to cut them off shorter. You're going to make kind of a raft type structure to put underneath it, and then that's going to be layered in probably a little bit of rawhide on the bottom and layers of furs. Typically deer, because white-tailed deer is primarily what the Eastern Algonquian people are going to be hunting. So they're the biggest animal that you can get a lot of, and a lot of their clothing and bedding and things is made out of a deer fur, deer skin. So I've got a nice layered bed here, so parents probably sleep up on the beds. Occasionally a house may also have a grandparent living in it, so you may have another bedstead for the adults that live in the house. Children may actually have just put some furs on the floor, a nice fur layer on the floor as well, and slept on the floor, so they would be separated a little bit from where the parents are sleeping. Thank you for joining me today on our tour of a Yehakin. If you liked our video, make sure to like and subscribe, and check us out on our other social media. And now that we've taken that nice Yehakin tour, I'm thinking about taking a little nap. And I'll see you guys next time.